War Scroll from the Book of the Blues, Parts 1 and 2. A short story by Rick Ivy. In 1959, over the span of one summer, Cy Peterson had divorced his wife of 30 years, sold his seafood restaurant, the New Fisherman's Inn, liquidated his life savings, and left his home state of Minnesota for the solitary comfort of Highway 61, that long snake of a road that stretched from chilly Duluth to muggy New Orleans. Before setting out, having relinquished all responsibilities and feeling no inclination toward restraint, he treated himself to a laurel green 1951 Oldsmobile Rocket 88. That rocket hugged the road as surely as it hugged his tired bones, and it seemed to sing along even the most pockmarked interstate stretches. This old hunk of steel, he had whispered to himself in the parking lot of a dealership while caressing his front fender, will be my one and only traveling companion, my truest friend. He was half right. When he began his journey, he had nothing but leaving on his mind, but just a few miles on, he found his thoughts fully engaged with the life he had hoped to abandon. Over the course of his travels, he had made many attempts, most of them unsuccessful, to dispel his reveries by focusing on roadside scenery. A shoulder-parked candy apple pickup, its flannel-clad owner investigating a punctured rear tire. A fruit and vegetable stand with a hand-painted sign that read, "Fresh and cheap." A black man with a guitar hitching for a ride. It seemed his restless mind, with nothing but an open road to fulfill his brain's itch for synaptic connectivity, could find no other dwelling than his past. Though he fought to stay present with the determination of a road-weary trucker slapping himself awake, he found the events of the prior summer too seductive to resist. Without even realizing it, he would fall into daydreams of the past. One second he was squinting to see through the bleary shine on his dirty windshield, and the next he was drowning his sorrows in downtown Duluth, seated at the Devil's Pit, the only barbecue saloon in Duluth that played nothing but blues music. He had come there seeking solace in drink one hot June night after a miserable argument with his wife. He thought about that first Schlitz and how it led to 7 more as he, yet again, traced the events that landed him in his present situation. Just 53, lanky, lonely, and now homeless, Cy wasn't at all the person he imagined he was. Though he was freer than he had been in decades, his freedom came at a hefty price, and he had paid in spades, his entire accumulated worth in business and personal assets. Lawyers had accurately estimated his financial worth, but no one had yet put a price tag on his soul, the assets of the heart distilled from years of love and trust and compromise. There were no established formulas for measuring his soul's value at its apparent apex, and no way to ascertain what was given up when it plummeted. So Peterson's attorney could never have deduced just how much Cy had lost of what he considered to be the central core of his identity. No one other than Peterson was aware of the dramatic shifts he had made to his personality over the years, all for the sake of marital harmony, which, as it turns out, had contributed to decades of bottled resentment. And these things were not mentioned at the settlement proceedings. And no one understood that despite feeling lonely and frustrated, he had valued his marriage and even respected its transformative process. He alone was aware of how far he had fallen, and he alone felt that he was not entirely to blame. It seemed that all eyes were instead focused on how he, Simon Peterson, for one fleeting chance to see himself wanted in the eyes of a stranger, to feel again the quickening of his pulse from a lover's soft kiss, her fingers through his hair. He alone had managed to squander a substantial chunk of his past and future earnings and spilled every ounce of resentment in just one night. "Who am I, really?" he asked aloud. Born into the restaurant business, he felt his future had been carved in stone since he was old enough to hold a spatula. He raked his hand through his gray hair and sighed as he recalled how his father had given everything he had to open the old Fisherman's Inn, to whittle a future for his wife and only son, and to keep it from closing he had given the best years of his life. Cy had inherited the business just months before he died, and, with his father's blessing, immediately changed the name to put his slightly less than original stamp on it. How desperately these many years had he longed for a son of his own to carry on the tradition started by his father, to be able to one day hand over the keys, as Cy's father had done, and say to him, "Make me proud." But that was just never in the cards. In the end, he would sell it for much less than it was worth, give most of the money to Peggy, his ex-wife, and trade restaurant keys, handing them over to a little man with big plans to build a parking lot for the keys to the Rocket 88. With his right hand tightly gripping the steering wheel at the 12 o'clock position, Cy used his left to lower the driver's side window. The warm air was heavy with, lavender? He inhaled deeply. He also detected just a trace of hickory. Or was that burning leaves? Though it was late September, he had already seen many leaves, red, gold, and bronze, suspended high in the breeze as he rocketed past them on the highway below. The scented air brought him again back to the Devil's Pit. It was a Wednesday night, so the bar was nearly empty. He hadn't yet paid for his first drink when the bartender slid him a second. Cy reached for his wallet, and the bartender, an old military hulk wearing a sleeveless black tee, stopped his methodical bar-top polishing to shake his head no. He nodded toward the other end of the bar, where an exceptionally attractive middle-aged woman wearing a tight dress of deep blue taffeta saluted Peterson with a raised glass. He smiled. "Join me?" he heard her ask. He walked slowly, one might even say cautiously, toward her. The jukebox was playing something by Dinah Washington, Evil Gal Blues. Standing before her, he felt suddenly hot. She had soft red hair, pale skin, and deep green penetrating eyes. She exhaled a plume of white smoke from her nose and extinguished her Jarum black clove cigarette. The air was heavy with the scent. It was intoxicating. Peterson rolled up his window. The fragrant air was beginning to make him feel nauseous, and he didn't even know how much further down the road he would have to travel to be rid of it. Highway 61 had mythic significance in the tradition of blues music, and being an obsessive record collector, it had its significance to Cy's life as well. He recalled hearing that Bessie Smith, the empress of the blues, had died somewhere along this interstate between Tennessee and Mississippi. He was just now entering Iowa, and it would be quite some time before he was in Tennessee. The road had straightened out in Wisconsin, and having studied the map, Peterson knew that it would not deviate for many miles. As such, he found it hard to keep his mind from drifting. He switched on the radio and heard Willie Dixon. He recalled hearing Dixon on the jukebox the night he met that other woman. "It's a true story, you know," she had said, taking out another cigarette. "Really? What's true about it?" he asked and offered her a light. "A preacher friend of mine told me that Dixon wrote the song 29 Ways about a lover after her husband threatened to kill him." "Somebody threatened Willie? Surprised?" "Well, yeah," said Peterson. "He's a boxer. Won the Golden Gloves championship in Illinois in 1937. Some people have no fear, I guess." "What do you think?" she asked. "About what?" "You think you could find 29 different ways to get to your lover if she needed you?" Peterson felt his face redden. I don't know, he said. She smiled wickedly, and he turned away. She had introduced herself as Luce. When he asked if that was short for Lucille, she made no response. Turning back, he said, "Seems like such an arbitrary number, though, doesn't it? 29? "I guess," she said. "What? You think he actually had 29 ways to get to his lover?" "Well, at the very least." Listen." Peterson laughed as Dixon's voice sang at that very moment the line of the song that supported her point. "Well, there you have it," he said. 29 ways for sure, maybe 2 more. No doubt about it, you are a true blue fan of the blues." "I am the blues," she said, and then took a drag of her cigarette. The blues warmed the hesitant spaces and filled the awkward pauses of their conversation. The blues was a subject with which they were both intimate, and neither needed to explain anything to the other. With the blues, they were both well acquainted. Peterson, now on his 6th drink, found it difficult to keep himself from revealing every private detail of his own personal blues story. There was a time, he told her, we were, I don't know, so different than we are now. We would fall asleep every night. God is my witness. Every night we'd be in each other's arms, wrapped up together, close and warm under the blankets. But time, it does something to people. I don't know what. But it sure as hell does something. She wanted children so bad, and we found out that we couldn't, that it wasn't going to happen for us. Well, I guess it just about crushed her. After we found out, she seemed to, look at me different. Started needing space. So much goddamn space I had to move into the next room. I could have been more patient, more understanding, but, well, I wasn't. Now, weeks go by with little more than a hello, goodbye, can you fix the faucet? I'm still attracted to her, but she wants nothing at all. I mean, we never even touched, not even a brush in the hallway. She doesn't love you, said Luce. It happens. People fall out of love as easily as they fall in. He straightened himself in his chair. I don't know that it's quite... Sweetie, she said quietly, staring into his eyes. I know it hurts. But it hurts because you know it's true. Take it from me. When the only thing a woman wants to share with you is the time of day, a meal, and a things-to-do list, it's over. The question for you is, what are you going to do about it? Do about it? Do about it, yes. Do you want to feel this crippling pain for the rest of your life? He looked at her. She spoke with care, with tenderness. She continued, I can see it's killing you from the inside out. Why do you think I bought you that drink? Hell, I've never seen anyone more desperate for a little tenderness, a little warmth. It's only natural to want to love and to be loved back. She began to stroke his hand gently as she spoke. I don't know what you mean. What can be done about it? She smiled and continued, do you think you're the only one who's ever been in this position? Trapped? Just ask Stanley here. She gestured to the bartender who was restocking the cold box behind the bar with new bottles of beer. Without looking up from his work, he shook his head in agreement. He'd tell you all about it. He was going to have a big family, lots of grandkids, but it didn't work out. Had to rethink all of his future plans when he found out his wife was, well, you get the picture. But look at him now. He's got his own business, doing all right. You can be too. I can be what? Peterson asked her. Happy, she said. Cy looked at the bartender and wondered just how happy he was with his new life. I don't know, he said. You can be loved again. There might be someone out there who will treat you the way you want. No, the way you deserve to be treated. You just have to find a way to end things for your wife. I mean, with your wife. I don't think I like where this is going, he said, and withdrew his hand from hers. Relax, she laughed. Hell's bells, what do you think I was suggesting you should... She laughed again and then quieted herself to just a smile and continued. I just mean that, people like you, nice guys, they sometimes need a little push to help them make that first step toward freedom. They need someone to help them verbalize what it is they want so that they can actually put it into words for themselves. She leaned closer, and he raised his glass and pressed it to his forehead, letting the condensation cool his brow. She continued in a low voice, I'll bet the idea has never even... I can tell by your expression right now, you would never even think of telling your wife that you deserve something more than she can give you. And honey, she wants something more too, I'm sure of that. He chuckled and stared absent-mindedly through his drink at the blurry racks of liquor on the shelf behind the bar. Just feminine intuition, I hope, he said. Now stop, she said. She caressed his cheek with the back of her hand. He turned to face her. Ever so slightly, she tilted her head to one side and stared deeply into his eyes. It's not you, and it's not your fault, sweetheart. It's really not. That is what you want to know, right? Well, it's not, baby. I've seen it happen dozens of times. He was caught by her soft expression. He couldn't move. But then again, she said, there's dozens of ways to get out. Dozens, he said with a smirk. That seems so arbitrary. 4 dozen, then, she whispered, at the very least. You mean there could be 2 or 3 more? She leaned closer and smiled. It's easy, she whispered. Easy. She kissed him, and he felt passion flood his being, a tidal pulse of hot-blooded desire. That night they left the bar together and spent the night in an expensive hotel, the finest one in the city. It was her suggestion. It was also her suggestion to get the honeymoon suite. When he woke, she was gone. He got dressed, paid the bill in the lobby, and walked to his car to find his wife, leaning against the driver's side door. He was stunned. Enjoy yourself? She asked him. Thin strands of her auburn hair moved with the gentle breeze, masking half of her face. She was beautiful, his wife. At 52, she could have easily passed for someone 20 years younger. His head was throbbing, and the early morning sun was blinding. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, but his vision remained blurry. He opened his mouth to speak, but there was nothing he could say. Her expression said it all. It's over, she said with no feeling. I'm divorcing you. 48 ways, he thought to himself. Maybe 2 or 3 more. He understood that the events of the prior evening and what had transpired afterwards were nothing more than a method of action, a plan laid out to liberate his wife from the prison of their marriage. Where did you find her? He asked. I couldn't possibly know what you're talking about. His jaw tightened and he lowered his gaze. I've got an attorney, she said. You should get one as well. It will make things easier for both of us. So that's it, he asked. You think I don't have the right? No, he said, you have the right. And you can play the victim and I'll be the scoundrel. But you didn't have to. Neither did you, she calmly answered. All right, then. This is what you want. This is what I want. But did you have to? He stopped short, and the weight of his words hung between them, heavy and still in the suddenly windless air. I mean, he began again. Can I ask you a question? I mean, come on, 30 years? The least you could do is answer one question for me. Would you do that? What? Did you have to ask her to be so kind to me? I mean, why did you ask her to be so sweet? It somehow makes it all so much worse. Her lips parted, but she did not speak. For an instant, she looked as though there was something she wanted to say, but maybe couldn't find the right words. Or perhaps she felt she shouldn't find the words. In the end, she chose to turn and walk away. He thought he had seen a trace of regret in her eyes, but their next meeting, in a settlement court, convinced him that he had probably misread that moment. Part 2. It now occurred to Simon that he had quite possibly misread many of his life's big moments. At first glance, each experience had seemed clear as clean glass, but then, much later, using new knowledge to widen the aperture on his hindsight telescopic vision and sharpen the lens, he would see some glaring truth protrude from the shadows and reveal itself within the bright light of his humiliation, only to retreat back to the darkness, lost and for all practical purposes forgotten. For by then it was too late. The thing had happened, and he had already been duped by his misperceptions. So, as he had always told himself, why dwell on deeds that cannot be undone? Only now did it occur to Simon that not only had he misread the original moment, he had also failed to course correct once he had realized the mistake. For much of his life, he had ignored this important step in his process of cognitive development. He never learned anything from his missteps, and he rarely, if ever, looked before he leaped. Instead of learning from any of these circumstances, like the time when he was just a boy that he had volunteered to be the catcher for a Sandlot baseball team despite having never worn a mitt. Or when he was 22 and proposed to Peggy only weeks after her first love had been killed in a car accident. And the latest, selling his restaurant, leaving his ex-wife most of the money, and taking to the open road in a weather-beaten used car with only the cash in his pocket when he could not have repaired even a busted headlight. Instead of blaming himself for being unprepared, he had always blamed the situation and time. Time had shown him the truth too late, then crept off like a burglar in the night. Still, even now, with his frequent drifts into dream-spun reveries making times passing unpredictable and immeasurable, Peterson had not considered that he should guard against time's erosion of truth, that things were not as they appeared. Nor could he grasp that there might be other forces stronger than time misdirecting him simply because he had yet again failed to consider what he was really doing, where he was really going, and why he felt so compelled to go there. So this realization that he had been a poor navigator throughout the journey of his life up to now had no effect whatsoever on his present momentum. As Peterson passed Robco Lake on his right and prepared for his Mississippi crossing, the orange haze of the Tennessee twilight hanging heavy above, a vibrant canopy of dimming blue hemmed in gold and streaked with red fire, he felt he could almost hear his heart pounding in his chest. Mississippi, the heart of the blues. The thought crashed through his consciousness like a thunderbolt. It made his neck hairs stiffen. It jolted him from the past and woke him to the present, suddenly aware that he was running on empty. He stopped to refuel at a filling station adjacent to a motor hotel just before reaching the state line. Cy assumed that the young man in the dingy t-shirt operating the pump was not from the U.S. His bronze skin, short nappy hair, and chiseled features reminded him of the Cuban revolutionaries he had seen in news magazines. The young man also had a peculiar accent, African, or perhaps from some island in the boiling Caribbean. "Yeah, man," he said, approaching the car, a dirty hand towel draped over one shoulder. Fill her up, please," said Peterson. "And, check under the hood, would you?" Though it had only been a few days, Cy felt as though he had been driving for weeks. He was in no particular hurry to arrive, having no real destination other than New Orleans, and that only because it was where Highway 61 ended. He drove in 4 to 5 hour intervals, often switching from erratic sprints to sudden turtle crawls, gunning it through the open straightaways, then slowing for anything that looked even slightly interesting. He even stopped at a few places, mostly run-down eateries and other offbeat curiosities, an old post office in Davenport, Iowa, an antique curio shop in Hannibal, Missouri, a junkyard in Memphis, Tennessee. When he was tired, he slept in the car at any convenient rest stop. But all of this hard traveling had not been kind on the old Rocket 88. For many miles he had tried not to hear the unfamiliar engine noises, but he could no longer afford to ignore the fact that the car's once even purr had clearly mutated into a sputtering growl. "Everything ever good there?" said the young man, slamming shut the car hood. "How's that?" "I say, Irie. Yeah, for like trouble me check, but everything all right." "Really? Because it was making this funny noise." "No bother with that. A loose built pon the motor, but me tighten it right up." "What's the damage?" asked Peterson. "What, for that? None." "Okay, well, thanks, but how much do I owe you for the gas?" "The gas?" "Yeah, what's the cost?" "No cost, Simon." "No cost? I'm sorry, what?" "Was this here thing me help you with it," said the young man. "The next time you help I and I." "Did you just call me Simon?" "Yeah, man, that's your name." "Yeah, but I don't know you, so how do you know my name?" The young man put his hand to his heart and laughed out loud. "What, this again? I'm her, Simon. How come you no carry me name in your heart?" "But, we've never met," said Peterson. "He make up his mind already," he said. "Is that so, Simon? You don't recall?" "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you are." "Oh, me heart," he said. Look, can I please give you something? No, he said. Next time. You're not done yet. With a puzzled expression on his face, Cy turned the key in the ignition. The car purred low and even. It sounded better than the day he bought it. He smiled and gently pressed the accelerator. As soon as his front tires hit the street, he glanced in his rearview mirror to get one last look at the strange man, but did not see him. He tapped the brakes lightly to slow down and did a quick double-take over his right shoulder, but he could see no trace of this mysterious benefactor. He had disappeared, 1 second there and the next not. He got out of Dodge quick, he said. I'll bet he doesn't even work there. No wonder he can afford to give out gas for free. Then Peterson began to speculate about just what the stranger meant with that business about the next time, and more importantly, how in God's creation did he know his name? The whole experience was far too weird to think about for very long, particularly when driving alone in an unfamiliar part of the country. Several dozen miles down the dark night highway, he had nearly shook the heebie-jeebies when he experienced another, even eerier encounter in Clarksdale. He had seen something on the side of the road at the 61 and 49 junction. Believing it was an animal attempting to cross the road, he slowed his car to a snail's pace. There, on the shoulder of the road and seated on a guitar case, a middle-aged black man dressed in a dark three-piece pinstripe suit was hitchhiking. Not just any man. Cy was quite certain he was the same man he had seen hitchhiking in Minnesota, or maybe Wisconsin, all those many miles back. He didn't know why he felt so inclined, but for some reason he stopped the car. Perhaps it was because the man was the spitting image of Robert Johnson. Or more precisely, he looked as Robert Johnson might have looked had he not died some 20 years earlier. Upon seeing the car stop, the man stood up, slowly, and picked up his guitar case. Beside him was a small satchel fastened with a red bandana. He looked Simon dead in the eyes, but didn't move. "If you itching to drive by now that you seen me up close, you might ought to go and do it," said the man. "Don't want no trouble now." "How long you been traveling down the road, hitching for a ride?" "Long enough," he said. "You offering or just taking a poll for the Census Bureau?" The quick-witted response caught Simon off guard, and he laughed out loud, first time in months. I'm offering," said Simon, thinking, why the hell not? "All right, then," the man said, smiling devilishly. Simon pulled the car over to the shoulder and stepped out to open the trunk for the stranger's meager possessions. "Blues singer?" Simon asked. "What? You think every black man in Mississippi with a guitar, thumbing a ride, and dressed in a three-piece suit is some kind of blues singer?" Simon chuckled as he took the guitar case from the stranger and placed it neatly in the trunk. As he did so, he noticed an insignia engraved on the face of the black leather guitar case. 2 red eyes above a lipless red goatee, placed between the ornately scripted capital letters L and S, also red but outlined in gold. Simon unlocked the passenger side door and then walked around the front of the car and took his seat behind the wheel. Inside the car, the man offered a long, bony hand. His fingernails, Simon figured because he was a guitarist, were exceptionally long, more like claws. "Scratch," he said. "Mr. L. Scratch." "Cy Peterson." They shook hands. "Cy for Simon?" "That's right," said Peterson. "L for Lewis?" Scratch smiled. "No," he said, "but I am a blues singer. At least I was a blues singer for a time. Been traveling around a bit. Headed back down to New Orleans. Gotta get me a mojo hand. Change my luck for the coming decade." As they sped off down the highway, Simon thought about asking Scratch if he was the same man he had seen hitchhiking in Minnesota, but quickly decided it would be better not to ask. He didn't want to voice any off-color assumptions and risk embarrassing himself. Besides, the odds of Scratch being that same man were... "Anyone ever tell you that you look a lot like Robert Johnson?" said Scratch, finishing Peterson's question. "All the time. Mostly blues-loving white folks." "Oh?" said Peterson. The man began fishing through the liner of his suit coat for something. He pulled out a book of matches. "I'm not him, though," he said, sighing. "Not Robert Johnson, though I do love his music." "I'd prefer if you didn't smoke, if it's just the same with you," said Peterson. "The car is, I just bought it, and the smell, "Well," said Scratch, eyeing Peterson curiously, "what have we here? A blues man who don't smoke. How you stand at clubs?" "I've never been to any real blues clubs, not with live music. A few bars with good jukeboxes, but that's about it. I guess there just aren't any blues fans up north where I am. At least, I don't know of any other than myself and maybe a few here and there. So, anyway, I get it all from the records." "Where are you coming from?" "Duluth, Minnesota. And you? You're from New Orleans originally?" Scratch smiled, rubbed his forehead, and glanced out the passenger window. "Well, when a man's been as many places as I've been, he gets to not thinking altogether about the origins of things. Just keep my eye on what's next. And that's New Orleans. Got a person down there I gotta meet. Settle a score." They drove on through the full moon night for a quiet while until Cy felt the noise in his head was too much to endure. He had been asking himself unanswerable questions. Who was this man? Was he traveling under a pseudonym? Was he famous? Did Cy own any of his records? For each question he had imagined far-fetched possibilities. Maybe he was some lesser-known talent who had never been recorded. Perhaps Scratch could teach Peterson to play the blues. Maybe that's who Cy really was, a blues singer trapped inside a middle-aged, exceptionally ordinary white man's body. And maybe that's why he had set out on the road in the first place, to find himself, a better self, one that he could respect, one that others could respect, somewhere along the gravel and grit of Highway 61. He hit a pothole in the road and was bumped back to reality. He decided to switch on the radio and heard the tinny whine of Robert Johnson's Crossroad Blues. "There now," said Scratch. "I'm on the radio." Peterson laughed. "Wish I had his money, though. Well, the money they made on him. You know, he didn't make half what them that pressed that record got. And all them folks who copped his licks. If it'd been me, I'd have made 'em all pay in spades. Of course, if it had been me, I'd have made a better record in the first place." "That right?" asked Peterson. "Sure enough. Oh, he's good, don't get me wrong. Johnson was good, but I'm better." How much better?" Scratch flashed Simon an inquisitive look. "Don't believe me?" "I didn't say that exactly. It's just that if you are, I'd love to hear how much better you are." "Pull the damn car over," said Scratch. "I'll learn you some blues." "You serious?" "Damn straight serious. Pull off up there on the right. We'll walk down to the muddy banks and I'll show you how the blues is supposed to be played." Simon pulled the car over to the shoulder of the road and came to a quick stop. Driver's side tires resting on the gravelly street edge while the two tires on Scratch's side dipped into a wet patch of tall grass. Just below the evening croak and clatter of night frogs and crickets, Peterson felt he could hear the tires sinking down into the dark mud beneath the grass. Had he not been so excited to hear Scratch play, he would have found a more suitable parking spot. He opened the trunk to retrieve Scratch's guitar, and together they made their way down through ankle-deep mud and the whistling grass to a muddy bank beneath the moonshade of a tall river birch. Scratch put his guitar case down and sat on a large knotted root. Simon sat cross-legged before him on the damp earth and watched as he pulled the enormous ebony instrument from its dark case. The moonlight shone bright and cold against its shimmering face as Scratch balanced the guitar on one knee, leaned close against it, and began to tune the strings. "Look here," he said in a low voice. "Reach in my case and fetch me that bottleneck slide." Simon found the slide and handed it to Scratch. It was warm and remarkably heavy for such a small thing. "It's a little-known fact about this world," began Scratch, beating a percussive chordal pulse on the 3 bottom strings with his thumb, index, and middle fingers, while he slapped out a slippery melody with a bottleneck slide worn on the ring finger of his fretting hand. "It's a little-known truth, and I've got to speak it. This world," he sang, "this world got deep pockets neath my feet." Simon began to nod his head to the beat. "This world," Scratch sang, "this world got bright lights only blind men see." Simon put his hands behind him, stretched out his legs, and felt his fingers sink into the sandy grit. He leaned back. His right foot began tapping the pulse. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Surely this man was a blues legend. "Some folks say I'm crazy, but I'm gonna get mine before the light gets me." Simon smiled. "This man," Scratch continued, "this man give and give, ain't never free." Scratch stared at Peterson when he said "this man," and unhappy memories were projected on the blank screen within the cinema of Peterson's mind. For a few seconds, he felt he was literally watching his life flash before his eyes. Distortions of truth began to seduce the workings of his mind, and he began to see his past in a strange new light. He had given everything he had up to now. He had given the best years of his life to an occupation that barely paid the bills. He had given his devotion and love to a woman who betrayed him, and then, for a chance to give love to someone whom he thought might actually love him back, he had lost everything he had ever earned. This song, he thought, spoke the truth. What had giving ever gotten him? "This man," Scratch hollered, "this man don't trust no ministry." Simon shivered. Raised in the chilly north with reverence for a Lutheran god, Simon had, as of late, completely abandoned his faith. Had it with his good life. Being good brought him nothing but misery. Scratch began to play an instrumental interlude and Peterson's jaw dropped. He had never heard anyone play with such supreme mastery. He shook his head in awe as Scratch performed seemingly impossible melodic figures with his fretting hand, sliding across thin strings to create swelling moans like elephant groans, then slashing with angular trills of shrill reverberations, while somehow, all the while, providing a contrapuntal accompaniment with his strumming hand. "Jesus," whispered Peterson. "I'd sell my soul to be able to play like..." Scratch abruptly stopped playing before Peterson could finish the sentence. "How's that now?" he asked. "I was just saying that I'd sell my soul to be able to play like you." A pause followed. Unbroken silence, as if all noise had stopped. The frogs, the crickets in the thicket, the lap and lick of the river, everything had stopped and was waiting for Scratch to speak. "What I got," he said at last, "you can never learn from no teacher, me or otherwise." Simon shook his head in agreement. "That said," Scratch continued, "I believe you want it bad enough. Well, you gotta go and steal it. No, I can't teach you nothing, but you stick with me. You'll figure it all out your own self." "Yeah, in 10 or 20 years, said Simon. "Nah," said Scratch. 6 days. 6 days? At most." "Why 6? "Mister," said Scratch, "there are ways of learning with books, and there are ways of knowing that need nothing but a handshake and a swig of liquor. You want to learn? I'll make you the best damn blues man in the country, but it's going to cost you what it done cost me, and I need that handshake, and you're going to have to drink on it. Now that's the rule." "Oh, I have no problem shaking your hand," said Peterson. "And since I've got not much of anything left, I don't mind giving you all I've got, but I don't have anything by way of a drink." Scratch smiled and held out his hand, the white nails glinting in the moonlight. It was so dark that the man's face was almost completely lost in the shadows, and Simon could only see his large white teeth. Simon Peterson stood up and shook his hand eagerly, as if he had just met a personal hero. "In the absence of whiskey, we shall make do with the wine of the Mississippi," said Scratch, handing Peterson a silver flask he had pulled from his guitar case. "Go down to the river, fill it up." Peterson walked down to the edge of the river and filled the flask. The river, even under the moonlight, was black as pitch. He walked back to Scratch, still seated beneath the river birch, and raised the flask in salute. "To the blues," said Peterson, taking a long first swig. He choked after a second gulp and started laughing. "What the hell?" he said, handing the flask to Scratch. "This tastes just like red wine." Scratch sniffed at it and turned his face in disgust, then emptied the flask on the ground. A puff of steam rose where it met the mud next to his feet. "Figured as much," he laughed. "I knew he'd come by here not long ago. This'll ruffle him for certain. Holy wine for a dark covenant." He began to laugh harder, and the sound, hollow and joyless, seemed to echo far across the river. "What's that?" asked Simon. "Who came by?" "My nemesis." "Who's your nemesis?" "Goes by many names, like me. Up there in Chicago, folks called him Sonny Houseman. First name of Christian. Done left Chicago, coming down to New Orleans to meet me." "What for?" "Every 10 years we meet to settle our differences. Now everyday folks, they think the tide of fortune flows by order of nature, the moon, the sun, the stars, and all that. There are them that live their whole lives never knowing bad luck, war, disaster. It ain't no accident." "No?" said Simon. Scratch struck a match and brought it close to his face to light a cigarette, illuminating the deep-set lines of his face. Was it just a trick of the light, or did his pupils flash red at the initial spark? The match danced as he inhaled and then went out. "No," said Scratch. "Everything happens by decree. This world is our chess game. I get my move and he gets his. But only one of us holds sway over the decade, 'cause only one of us can move first." "I'm not sure I understand." "You ever want something real bad? Done everything to make it happen, but nothing come of it? Then, after that, you find things ain't what they seem. Somebody set it all up. Make sure everything you ever done falls to shit. You ever know that feeling?" "I guess I do." "Well then, you know how I feel. Matter of fact, you understand more than you think. What I want, he make damn sure I ain't gonna get. So me and him, we at war. And this time, I'm gonna win. I just make sure of that. And all starts down in New Orleans. You lucky. Most folks, we see them, they don't ever see us. Don't never know what goes on year to year." What's in New Orleans?" "Little blues shack called Terminus Macto. Most don't know it's there. But that's where it will be decided. Only one of us can make the first move. The other can react accordingly. But after that first move, too little too late. Every 10 years we settle who moves first." The unusually pungent scent of Scratch's cigarette was making Simon dizzy. Where had he smelled that scent before? How do you decide who moves first?" "Contest," said Scratch. "Been as many different contests as you can set your mind to imagine, but for many, many years now it's been music that determines the order of decree. And this time the fool done agreed to a blues head-cutting contest. My bread and butter." A clove cigarette. Scratch was smoking a clove cigarette. "I might not look it," continued Scratch, "but I'm tired. Tired of games. Tired of being the only one. So I set my sights on having a son, just like his old man done long ago. Let somebody else do the work down here. How may a woman up north so hungry for a child she sold out her old man? Simon felt an unbearable tightening in his gut, as if someone had found two loose ends from the invisible strands of sinew that held his innards stitched together and then suddenly gave both a sharp yank. His mind raced back to that bar in Duluth. Was it actually called the Devil's Pit? What was her name? That stranger who had smoked clove cigarettes and reduced his life to ashes. What was her... Dear God, he thought. What have I just done? Luce? He asked aloud. In the darkness, all he could make out was that white smile. Sweetie, answered the familiar woman's voice. The ride to Terminus Macto was sullen and hushed. If Cy had any doubts about the truth of what Scratch had told him, they were all cleared up when they pulled into the dirt lot adjacent to the Blues shack. A crowd of people had gathered outside, seemingly waiting for them to arrive. A great many were frightful to behold, naked, pale, thin, and emaciated, skin clinging to ribs like a wet t-shirt on a timid swimmer. They wore permanent smiles stretched to uncomfortable limits. Others, draped in white linen robes, were beautiful and tranquil, calm and certain. They moved with the ease of a man who has seen his own execution, laughed at its utter absurdity, and afterward, having come through the worst of it, kept nothing for himself but a sincere wish to give to others. Who are they? Asked Peterson. Them's the judge and jury, sinners and saints. Though by the look of them, the ones gathered here, I'd say mostly sinners, my people. He began to laugh. He's in for a surprise, I should say. How can you be so sure? Because, little man, said Scratch, I got you. And if you knew who you was, you know I got it all in the bag. You the ace up my sleeve. Now stay here for a short while. Best if you don't see us come in together. Don't want to spoil the surprise. Why should I agree to that? Why should I agree to anything you ask me to do now? Scratch showed his teeth, more of a crazed grimace than a smile. 'Cause I can make things a damn sight more uncomfortable, he said. That's why. Scratch stepped out of the car, pushed his way through the nameless throng, and entered Terminus Macto. Other than a few beer ads, there was no real sign above the door, and the place looked like it was barely standing. In a few minutes, the assembled crowd had all followed Scratch's lead, and Simon was left alone in the parking lot. He could hear cheers and shouts from inside and the rattle of a drum. He could think of nothing but hightailing it out of there, but when he turned the key in the ignition, he found the car would not start. Having no other recourse, he stepped out of the car and entered the dilapidated Blues shack. The inside of Terminus Macto had tall glass windows and a vaulted ceiling buttressed by ribs made of crude, splintered beams of dark, ancient oak. The inside was far larger than the outside suggested. Bathed in smoky blue light, the long, narrow room stretched toward a candlelit stage that reminded Simon of a church altar. The crowd noise was getting more raucous, and glancing around, Simon saw he was surrounded by both the hideous and the gorgeous. He pushed his way past the beaten and the damned, the holy and the high-minded, and he found himself an empty table directly in front of the stage where he saw Scratch, stage right, tuning his hollow-bodied electric guitar, and a small, unassuming figure dressed in a white tuxedo seated at the piano on the far left side of the stage. Though the figure's face was hidden behind the much taller upright piano, Peterson could see he was wearing a white top hat that bobbed just above the instrument's upper shelf. Leaning against the piano was a man with a silvery halo above his full head of long, dark curls. This man had great white wings and was dressed in flowing white robes. He was the electric bass player, and Simon knew him at once to be Michael the Archangel. And behind the drums, a red-horned demon he had heard Scratch referred to as Naj Nishnam was tightening the skin of the snare and testing its rattle. "Right then," said Scratch after a time. "Let's get it underway." The man behind the piano leaned to one side, poked his head out, smiled warmly at Simon, and said, "Yeah, man." "Say what now?" said Scratch. The man stood up, shrugged his shoulders, and laughed. He was the young man Peterson had seen at the filling station. "Well, what have we here?" said Scratch. "The little boy wonder. What's the matter? Sonny Houseman just too dark for you, old man." "Yeah, he like you old about 20 year younger and from way down. An eruption of laughter from the crowd. "Well," said Scratch, "do tell." "Him say the poor people of Jamaica got soul and got rhythm. Him say from Trenchtown come a new sound and deep spirit, gonna change the way people see the poor ever on. Him say this sound gonna change those who could not see. No color gonna blind the people after that. Dark light are the same. One love." "Him says all that, huh?" "Well, I say he already knows you done lost this one and is thinking about the next one." "Maybe so, maybe not. But you not won nothing yet." With that, Scratch shot a fierce look at the figure in white, and with one downward lurch from his mighty dark hand, he struck a loud chord on his guitar that shook the floor and rattled the window frames, nearly cracking the tall panes of blue-stained glass within. The musicians fell one by one in line with the groove. A tish-tish-gop-a-dunk, a tish-tish-gop-a-dunk. Scratch was vicious in his sonic attack. 3 razor-pitched slashes stung high, sharp, and fierce, then dropped from a cliff as he raked the strings suddenly up and quick to then pause for what felt like a suffocating eternity of breathless hunger, deep, wide, and low. A quiet melody, stillborn, broken open, teasing on a slow black sea of drone, hollow and growing, growling and seething. His alabaster lines rose from the depths of darkness, cut the air like ice, demanded the crowd's attention, and they could not turn away. His lines cried of longing and wanting, of dark, untold wishes and murderous desire, while gaunt shadow shapes, twining and writhing, having slowly scaled the walls behind them, danced lusty scenes choreographed to the tune that Scratch teased, turned, and towed. He was working his way, slow and tortuous, up, and ever climbing up the spine of melody, and the melody screamed, "Me, moi, mine, all me, moi, mine, all." All and all and all and all, Peterson's thoughts seemed to echo the twisting knot of Scratch's guitar lines. This was the all of his unquenched thirst, the song he had heard playing for years in the back of his mind, always promising more. If only his wife would love him, touch him, want him. If only he had not been besieged with career misfortune. If only his father had believed in him. If only he had gotten more of it all, he would not be so damned unhappy. This was the exact song that always promised more, yet somehow resolved its final cadence to so much less. This was the song that he had heard, but would hear no more. The truth of his life and the lives he had previously lived came to him at that moment, and Simon Peterson recognized, for the first time in his 53 years, who he really was and what he was meant to do, and he was filled with regret at his carelessness. He had wasted so much precious time and sold the one thing that mattered most to the one being who mattered least. His story told, the hall mad with adulation, Scratch stood defiant, monstrously tall and devoid of humor, all business, as he fell in line with the rhythm and waited for his adversary to respond. But the man in white just smiled widely, as if he was having the time of his life, or like he had just remembered the punchline to some hysterical joke, and he lifted his hands from the piano, leaving nothing but the groove. Tish, tish, gabadung, tish, tish, gabadung, to lightly carry the aftermath of the Dark Lord's heavy weight. Scratch, somehow sensing what was beginning, but not intuiting that he too was part of the plan, immediately stopped playing, leaving only two to ride the tish tish gabadunk. Locked in the groove, Michael the Archangel continued to nod, but lifted his arms high above his head, leaving only Naj, the demon drummer, who, like the others, found it impossible to impose his own desire on this undying, perpetual, yet silent groove. Peterson looked around and saw all heads bobbing to the unplayed rhythm, and even the most mangled and disfigured of the damned looked somehow serene and untortured. It was as if they had forgotten themselves, who they were, what they had done, and why they were miserable. And they had just awoken to the knowledge that they were free from their past, free from all want, and free to let go. One by one, they eased into the untold truth of the groove, and one by one, they all disappeared in a flash of white light, completely forgiven. And before long, the saints too disappeared until no one was left but Scratch, the figure in white, and Peterson. Looking around at the empty room, and still nodding to the groove, a tish-tish gabba-dunk, a tish-tish gabba-dunk, Peterson started laughing. He could not believe it. Without playing a single note, the figure in white had defeated Scratch. "Well, well," said Scratch. "Well played." The figure in white came out from behind the piano, removed his hat, and bowed low. Scratch then turned his attention to Peterson, who was having trouble controlling his riotous fits of laughter. "That's right. Laugh it up now, old man," said Scratch. "'Cause where you're headed, you won't be laughing long. You forget a little deal?" "Get on with it," said the figure in white. "You know me not gonna let you take me best friend. You give me back this here stupid man and me stand back." "A meaning?" said Scratch. "The first move, I let you win." "Oh, you gonna let me win? Guess that's one way of putting it. Here's another. I got the jump and done snatched it right from your hands before you played your first note. Me never play a thing." Scratch grunted something under his breath, and then packed his guitar in its case, stepped off the stage, and walked toward the door. Passing Simon, he smiled slyly and said, "I think I'll keep that ride of yours. I like the way she drives." He turned when he reached the door. "Until next time," he said. "Yeah, man," said the figure in white. "The 70's gonna be mine." When it was just the two of them, Peterson approached the stage with his head lowered, and then got down on his knees and began to weep. "My lord," he said, "my dear, dear, sweet lord, forgive me. I didn't know. I forgot myself." "Rise, Simon," said the figure in white, smiling. "You got work to do, me brother. Him gonna make big trouble, but we gonna push back like him never seen. You're gonna go to San Francisco, California." "California?" "California. These past years been good to many, but too many get lazy. Then forget that love is the thing. No money. But the young people, me see the young people hungry for the change." He put his hands on Simon's shoulder. "You, Simon, you gonna make love the thing for the young people. In San Francisco, you're gonna help them open their eyes there. And then they're gonna catch round the world like a fire." "But the only thing young people care about is rock and roll," said Peterson. "Yeah, man. And on their rock, you're gonna build them a church." inspired by the song 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover by Paul Simon and Jesus Left Chicago by ZZ Top.
Let it shine on me, that's all I need. Let your loving light, why don't you let your light shine on this boy? That's all I need, all I got to have. Just wanna get a little more of your sweet little light. That's my girl, and you know she do, yes she do. So when I get lonesome early in the morning, I ask my baby for the day is dawning. Shine on your light, let it shine. Shine on your light, let it shine on me. Just a little bit high, a little bit high, a little bit high, a little bit high. Why don't you let it shine?